this meeting will be recorded for any people who can't come today but are still interested in learning about academic planning. Okay, so this is what we'll be sort of going over today. So we'll start off with a brief introduction. Me and Mason, or Mason and I, will be mainly hosting this meeting and talking about our experiences when it comes to high school academics. And we'll be going over some classes and clubs, and hopefully answering some of your questions that many of you will have. So starting off with the introduction, this meeting is sort of for us to share our experiences since Mason and I are both high school juniors, about to enter our senior year in high school to hopefully help reduce your guys' stress when it comes to choosing classes and choosing what clubs and activities to participate in high school. And just a brief disclaimer, both of us go to Melbourne High School. So if you guys don't go to the same high school or just like have different experiences, I think that's pretty normal. And also on top of that, like everybody has their own experiences. We're just sharing what things look like from our point of view, what we wish we would have known when we started out high school to hopefully help you guys. But just so you guys know, like everybody does go through different things, and we'll try to share as many different perspectives on things as possible that we are aware of. But if we do miss anything, um, just know that yeah, everybody experiences things a bit differently. Oh, yeah, so start off with a bit about me and who I am. I'm Angelina, and so far I've taken 10 AP classes, one of them being a self-study one. And in terms of clubs, I would say I'm pretty involved in school, and I've done like a variety of clubs. I've tried a lot of different things, but ultimately here are some clubs that I found I really enjoyed and like I'm currently in and will probably continue until the end of senior year. So Science Olympiad, Math Club, Association for Women in Mathematics, Speech and Debate, as well as peer leaders.
Hi, and I'm Mason, and by the end of senior year, I'll have taken 11 APs. In ninth grade, before taking my AP classes, I was in ninth grade honors band. And some of the clubs I'm in include like my public speaking club that I helped co-preside and found. And my other club I'm in is the Global Diplomacy Club. I'm the president, and we'll be rebranding it as the Global Impact Club for next year. Yeah, so right now we have at Milburn four levels of classes. CPP and CPA are the standard classes, college preparation classes. And basically these are the standard like normal classes across maybe America. And essentially if you're trying to shoot for a very good school, somewhere you're very interested in, you should be shooting for accelerated or honors equivalent classes in at Milburn. And these classes are pretty challenging, but they are manageable. Honestly, advanced placement classes are substantially harder than accelerated classes generally, but they are manageable. And my tip is that you shouldn't overload yourself on AP classes later on in high school. You should focus on balancing them out with other classes, such as accelerated classes. And it's a good idea to mainly focus on the um, more advanced classes you're interested on and balancing them out with easier classes and the classes you're less interested in.
So I think for me, when it comes to what classes to choose, there's sort of four things I consider. So first is rigor. Like as Mason said, I don't want to like overburden myself, and I do want a course load that's relatively manageable. So I like to ask like upperclassmen or people who have taken the classes, maybe even the teachers sometimes, about how hard the class is, so I can sort of gauge how much difficulty or how much time I have to spend preparing for the class, especially like tests as well as doing homework before I actually take the class. And then second, sort of relevance. Like when you're debating between two classes and you're not too sure which one to take, I would ask like whether or not this class is related to what you want to do in the future. And I think this is pretty important especially because if you're considering whether or not to take a relatively hard class that's more related to what you want to do versus like an easy class for GPA boost, this might be a question that helps you just ultimately decide between those two options. And then thirdly, I think interest is like a very big aspect to consider because it's very hard to perform well in a class you're just not interested in, which I found like happened to me. Like if I'm just not interested, it's just really hard to pay attention. So if you're interested in what's being taught, even if it's like a class that's not as like prestigious or a class that's like more difficult, it's easier for you to pull through and perform well in the class. And then lastly, availability. I think this is less of an issue with the new AP system, but there's still like certain classes you can only take when you've hit like a certain grade level or like a certain like prerequisite grade. So it's very difficult for you to take a class that you're not qualified to take, like per our school standards. And also because we do have a limited amount of teachers at our school, there's not always space for you to take a class, and they ultimately decide through random like selection. So if you don't get chosen, like try to take the class again next year if it's something you're really interested in, or ultimately like replace it with another class that is very similar and can still give you that amount of academic engagement that you want, but like might not be the same class.
So there's some graduation requirements you need to graduate high school, and it's important not to forget about them because they can essentially screw you over later on. Um, one of them is a two-semester art class, and great thing about that is that music fulfills this, like band, chorus, or orchestra. Personally, for me, I fulfilled it by taking honors band in ninth grade, and getting it over with. And for ninth grade is a good year to get a lot of these graduation requirements done. And another one is the non-Western course. Essentially, a non-Western course is something like a social studies elective that focuses on like sociology or global security or women's studies. But you can also fulfill this requirement by taking an AP social studies class in senior year that you might be interested in. For example, if you're interested in studying biology in college, AP psychology fulfills that, and it's pretty related to biology.
And then also there's a financial literacy course. I think a lot of like people are recommended to fulfill this like requirement in like freshman year or sophomore year. But I feel like if you do plan on taking AP economics or just macro or micro and macro, you can wait until senior year to actually fulfill this requirement because it does count as fulfilling the financial literacy course. And then also, I've been talking to a lot of freshmen, and they told me there was this new sort of like technology requirement that me and Mason, or Mason and I, didn't really like have to fulfill. And I heard that you have to take sort of like a CS class or something technology related to sort of like fulfill like this requirement because it's related to like the global like technology boom and how like AI is like coming more into play. So kids like now have to come more involved in terms of like technology wise. But we're not too sure about this because we haven't personally needed to fulfill this requirement, although we've both taken like classes that would have fulfilled this requirement.
Now, here's some like hard classes we personally went through. Um, integrated geoscience or integrated chemistry and earth science was not too hard actually, but it was a big jump from eighth grade science. It had a pretty rigorous pace compared to what we had to go through in biology, which was very easy. But over the year, it actually got easier as we got to the second semester with topics such as cycles and astronomy. And essentially, it's a class that actually prepares you pretty well for future science classes at Milburn. Now, I'm taking this class next year, but AP Physics 1 and 2 is just a lot. It goes at a rigorous pace because there's two AP exams in like it's essentially two AP classes in one. Um the other hard class that I'll talk about is US History 1, which essentially it had a lot of essays, had a lot of specific writings that the teacher wanted you to write about. You had to write in many different nuances, which was very challenging. There were also some pretty tough multiple choice questions, and the difficulty of the class also largely falls upon which teacher you had. My teacher was a bit better, but for a lot of people, this class was very, very tough.
On top of that, I thought English 9 as well as American literature was pretty hard, mainly because as like Mason said, the reason why like IGS, or I think it's called ICE now, was so hard was because it was so different than what you're used to in like middle school. So there's like different expectations, and like even the style of writing you're expected to do is very different because middle school focuses a lot on personal and creative writing, while high school art writing classes and English classes tends to focus more on argumentative writing, which is very different. And there's also a very, very, very high standard you have to hit for teachers to be satisfied with your writing. So it's like just a big learning curve trying to like sort of hit that standard, especially when you're coming in and not really knowing like what to do. And then AP Spanish language, I honestly think that like any AP language other than like English, which is probably most people's first language, is probably going to be very difficult. I personally found it very difficult because the content was very difficult. I had a lot of difficulty understanding what was going on in the class, mainly because I didn't have opportunities to practice Spanish outside of school. Like, I do watch Spanish movies on the occasion, I do follow like Spanish media on the occasion, but just in general, like, it's very hard to get like that authentic experience that AP Spanish language sort of really requires. Especially when it comes to like conversational speaking or like audio listening or interpreting like short stories that you would have like in your native language. And also, there's very high expectations, especially like in the class in terms of participation, where you're expected to talk a lot and converse a lot, even when you're not comfortable or not sure about like what's the right answer. And then very, very notoriously difficult at our school. Not only is there a lot of difficult content and the pace of the class is very, very fast, there's also a lot of high expectations and you're sort of expected to do a lot, and it's a big jump from the ninth grade science course.
And here are some fun classes we took. Generally, these classes um help your grade, like your GPA a lot. Um, Actually, computer science. I started the track in ninth grade with computer science two, then went on to computer science A, and then computer science principles. And there was very like light coursework, and it was counted as computer science two was an honors class, but the rest were AP classes. Essentially, it gave me a great AP GPA boost, and the AP exams were very easy. Now, AP exams count for college credit, and depending on the school you go to, it can actually help you skip a class or two. So taking those classes were some of the most enjoyable, most like stress relieving classes I've actually taken. The other class I would recommend is band, chorus, or orchestra, essentially continuing whatever you did in middle school. Not only does it eliminate the GPA requirement, but you get fun pieces and concert opportunities. It allows you to audition for musical ensembles such as jazz band. And again, it's a GPA boost. It's interesting. There's a lot of social events to go to. And my year in band was a very exciting one. And the last class I actually thought was pretty fun was AP European History. Although it's an AP class, it was one of the easier ones. There were some projects I found learning pretty enjoyable, and it develops your AP test writing. I actually found AP United States history more interesting, but the general consensus is that European history is pretty much easier. Though essentially all the classes I mentioned are pretty much lighter and they do help support your GPA a lot.
In terms of fun classes I took or that my friends took that I know about, I think fiction writing is very fun. Especially in high school, it's really easy to sort of lose your passion for writing when you're trying to write argumentative pieces like 24/7 or like 25/8, whatever the saying goes. So I think fiction writing for me was like a time to sort of chill off, relax, and write about things I was actually like interested in, or just for fun, like creative writing, which you don't really sort of get to do in high school. And the environment of the class is very like relaxing, and most people there are friends, so the class does feel more like a club than like an English high school class. And then I personally did not take American Handicrafts. I took honors art to fulfill my requirement, which you do have to try out for in middle school. Well, I heard American Handicrafts is very enjoyable. You get to do a lot of knitting and I think plushie making, which I think is very fun. Especially because now like the art periods are now 80 minutes, or like every single class period is 80 minutes. So you have more time to sort of relax, especially if the rest of your schedule is very rigorous. And then lastly, I also didn't take true crime, but a lot of my friends have taken true crime or will be taking true crime. It's essentially like a forensics course saying like, oh, like this is the crime scene, and you have to figure out like who committed what crime or like what happened at the crime scene. And I think it's a very different take on like science that most people don't ever get to experience. And I heard it was very fun and just an enjoyable class in general.
Yeah, and now we're gonna go into languages. So if you're a rising sophomore, junior, or senior, this matters a bit less. But essentially choosing a language can often determine a lot of like stress that you go through. Each language has its merits. For example, Latin is loosely related to biology, to writing, to law, and Spanish is particularly good if you're trying to focus on medicine and biology. But each language does have its own like difficulty. For example, languages from middle school that you're continuing, such as Spanish and French, tend to have more people. So, in turn, the curriculum is a bit more challenging, especially AP Spanish language and the following AP Spanish literature, which requires 4 year required texts for the exam, which is just insane. So I'm not continuing with that. Um, the easier languages tend to be Italian and Chinese. Latin, I think it's easy, but it does have a midterm. But anyways, Chinese is an easy class actually. The language is hard, but the class is easy, and the teacher is more relaxed. But the thing is, it's essentially a bit controversial to colleges because you naturally speak that language, but in turn, it is a GPA boost. And if you take AP Chinese early on, you can fit in more classes in your schedule after finishing that language. But if you want an easier language class without uh like learning an old language that you already know, I would recommend Italian. But ultimately, it's important to chase your passions, what you're interested in. And I would recommend Spanish if you want to go into medicine. But you don't have to go to AP Spanish language if you take Spanish. You can take an honors Spanish business class, honors Spanish art class, which are relatively easy. And my friends in those classes, they've enjoyed them a lot, and it makes me sometimes wish I took those classes. Now, there's a bit of confusion between these two AP classes, AP Computer Science A or AP Computer Science Principles. Essentially, AP Computer Science A is the coding one. You learn Java, you learn how to code, you learn how to take the tests, do all the multiple choice and free response writings. Well, AP Computer Science Principles is more about how the internet works, a lot less um, challenging stuff. The multiple choices are more pseudocode, very easy multiple choice compared to the AP Computer Science A exam. But the thing is, you can take both AP Computer Science Principles and A, but after my year, they actually made it so you can take Computer Science Principles after Computer Science A, which is what I did. And that is a GPA boost. So I would recommend that if you are a freshman taking Computer Science 2, or just a person in general, like a student in general, to take AP Computer Science A because that is the one that matters. That's the one that colleges generally accept more credit for, and you actually learn stuff in it. The teachers are also pretty good for computer science. They will write you rec letters, but yeah. And the actually the computer science principles exam is a bit honestly, I found it a bit harder than the computer science A exam because the curve for the exam is insane. For most AP exams, actually, the curve for a five is around a 70%, just like a C on a normal test you would get. So a five isn't that big of an issue. But on computer science principles, it is a 90% for a five. So in turn, I would actually recommend computer science A. And then after finishing computer science A, going on to take AP government or AP statistics instead of that class.
Okay, AP Chem versus AP Physics. Um, for rising juniors, you guys might have already chosen already, but typically our school like make or has like a science class outlined for you per year. But when you get to junior year, you do get to choose whether or not you want to take AP Chemistry versus AP Physics. And essentially, if you do want to take AP Physics C senior year, you have to take AP Physics, which was a new requirement I think they introduced in my year. It used to be like if you self-studied physics, you can enter into um Physics C, but now you have to take either accelerated physics or AP physics to take Physics C. And I think there's a lot of like different rationales like floating around. I've like talked to a lot of my friends as to why they chose one class over the other. So a lot of my friends taking AP chemistry picked it because they're either going into biochem, chemistry, biology, something that's more related to their major. And they also believe like this class would be easier than physics, or for them it would be easier. So they chose it as like a GPA boost for their junior year. And then a lot of my friends who took AP Physics, the rationale was that they want to take Physics C senior year and it's more related to their major. Like they're either going into like engineering or something like more related or just like the actual physics major. And that's why they took that class. I haven't taken AP Chemistry yet. I'll be taking that next year, but I do think AP Physics is pretty hard because it goes really fast. But our school did introduce a AP Physics 1 course only for next year, and I think years beyond that, where you can only take Physics 1 versus like this like normal physics class we take, which is 1 and 2. And I think that class would probably go a lot slower and be a lot more manageable for most students. Okay, this is a big question I get asked because I do um help or I am a tour guide for our school in terms of like for middle schoolers, and I get asked this question a lot, like whether or not we should listen to the guidance office. And from my experience, I think the guidance office is actually pretty helpful because they're the ones determining what your schedule looks like. They're the ones deciding what classes you get put into. So I would take most of their suggestions. And I think the more you get to know your guidance counselor, the more they're able to make better suggestions for what you want to take. So, for example, a lot of people like don't talk to their guidance counselors, which I find is pretty interesting. So, like, they don't really know like what you do or what classes you want to take. So, like, if that's the scenario, then maybe you should talk to your teachers and have them talk to the guidance office. Like, for example, I know somebody who wants to go into like computer science that wants to take applied computer science or applied computer science, but that course was randomly selected for students because there's way too many students who want to take the class. And therefore, like he was suggested not to take the class, but he actually wanted to take the class. And because he was on robotics and the teachers do believe that he's probably a better a better like candidate to take the class, they went to talk to the guidance office and sort that out. So I feel like in general, the guidance office knows more about classes than you probably do. But if something like if you're really, really, really like, oh, I have to take this class, then maybe you don't listen to their suggestion. But that was just my experience.
Now, here are some AP elective suggestions. Essentially, you don't want to overload yourself on APs, but if you have enough, here are some recommendations I would take. For freshman year, there are no APs allowed at Milburn High School. I personally took band and computer science too to get a lot of stuff out of the way. Sophomore year, there's this actually Excel level class called science research, which you get to do research projects, you get like tangible outputs, you get stuff that actually goes on your application, which you can follow up with AP research in your later years of school. But otherwise, I would recommend European history or computer science that year. Both are very good classes. For junior year, it's more about what you're interested in. Statistics is generally pretty helpful, but it was one of my more it was unexpectedly one of my more challenging classes. But if you're interested in economics, AP government is good, AP computer science is good, and there's also an AP art history. Now, senior year is where you can essentially choose what you want. And this is where it gets more into what you're interested in studying in college. But the majority of those electives are AP social studies classes. Psychology is probably the closest related to STEM fields. There's also AP economics, which is also kind of related. Some other classes include AP Comparative Government, AP US Government, and those are more if you're really interested in studying humanity-based fields. I believe you can also take AP Environmental, and if you're taking AP Physics C in senior year, you can take AP Chemistry as an elective. Um, that is a lot of reasons why people take AP Chemistry in 11th grade because they don't want to deal with all that science in 12th grade. But besides that, essentially, just when you're choosing your electives and whether to take an AP or not, think about the rigor, think about what you're interested in. It's not good just to like take a bunch of APs for the sake of taking them.
Also, like on that note, sort of to add on, our school, in terms of GPA, if that is like at the top of your priority list, they only weigh a certain amount of APs for your GPA. So, for example, sophomore year, you only get two APs that actually count as AP classes, while the rest of them just count as Excel classes. So, if GPA, like you are interested in becoming valedictorian, and or I think most people who do become valedictorian pretty much max out on APs. But if you are interested in having like a super high GPA, then maybe like taking super rigorous or like extremely difficult AP classes may not be for you. Although I don't recommend like preferring your GPA over like a more interesting AP class or more difficult AP class just because you want to like quote unquote have a higher GPA. And in terms of self-studying, I actually don't recommend self-studying APs outside of school unless few like circumstances. I think for freshmen, if you already speak a language at home that there's an AP class for that you do want to get credit for, so like for college, I would recommend taking that because for freshmen you don't have any APs to worry about. So personally, I took AP Chinese my freshman year, which I would say was like pretty cool, pretty easy. But as like you get older, like sophomore, junior, senior year, it's way harder to self-study APs outside of school. And the APs you want to self-study are probably offered at our school at some point. So there's really no point in taking it earlier unless it's a class either our school doesn't offer, you want AP credit for, that like you didn't get into. Like I know a lot of students who got into Excel biology wanted to take the AP level course. And I do think for certain classes like biology, the accelerated course does prepare you well for the AP exam as well. Although because it does go a little bit slower, you do have to self-study a couple units on your own, which some students find difficult. But like in general, I think self-studying just puts extra stress on your workload that is probably already pretty difficult to begin with. So unless you really, really need to self-study something, probably just go with what you are taking in school. Clubs. So why should you start or join a club? First of all, like just it's just fun. Like in general. Like even if it had nothing to do with like college or like anything else in my life, I think joining you can de-stress from school, which I think is very good applications. It probably demonstrates like interest or like passion for something you do like, which I think is pretty important. And more on like the personal side, you get to learn a lot of new things and try a lot of different things, which I think is pretty important, especially like as a teenager or a like maturing student that's going to like college or somewhere new. I think it's great to like try new things, do new things because high school is like a great time to like find new interests, find new passions that you want to like continue throughout the rest of your life.
Now, some great clubs include the Science Olympiad, Model UN, Speech and Debate, and other ones listed here. Uh, Clubs that are actually pretty helpful can be Spanish, French, or whatever language clubs you're taking, because you really get to know the teacher themselves. That actually applies to more clubs, but in Spanish or French, where it's more participation based, getting to know the teacher, getting to talk with them, getting to practice your language outside of class really does help your performance in that class.
And I feel like this is really important to consider when it comes to balancing out your schedule. Like in terms of sports or like things like Science Olympiad or speech and debate and robotics, as well as I think Mono UN, you have to compete on the team. So you do end up like either missing school or having weekends taken away because you do have to compete. And it is like I would say probably more commitment than your non-competitive clubs, which usually happen during lunch or after school. where you just show up for an hour and like have events like after school. So I would just say like be mindful of that because if you do end up doing a lot of competitive clubs, some competitions may overlap. You might feel overwhelmed, and it's just very difficult to sort things out if you do a lot of like competitions.